Hi guys, welcome back. I wanted to show you how to export images from Lightroom today. Um, in order to complete your next assignment, you're going to need to be able to get your images out of Lightroom once you've edited them. If you recall from our previous videos and from the textbook, um, when we're editing an image in Lightroom, we're not actually making any changes to the image file. What we're doing is we're seeing a simulation of what it would look like with these previews here, and then we have our database is updated every change we make. It's all saved in our history here, but nothing is really truly permanent or baked in until we export a copy of the image. So it's a little bit different, something to get used to if you're used to Photoshop, but I think as you live with it, it'll make a lot of sense. So let's select a few images. I've picked a couple already here that we want to export. Obviously, if your folders and collections are well organized and you've rated things, it'll be really quick to filter it down to just the ones that you'd like to export. So let's go to the export module. I'll give you a quick overview. What we're doing right now, we're exporting to the hard drive. I never use anything but export to hard drive because my laptop doesn't have a CD or DVD burner. Generally, I don't need to export directly to an email. I'll export them to my hard drive and then attach them later. And these are a completely different issue right here. This gets into color management, which we're not going to touch on here. So it should default to hard drive. Next, we need to tell it where we're going to send it. If we're going to rename the files, we would do that here. If you have some video files, I know everyone's camera these days does video also, we would deal with that here, but I'm only exporting still images today. File settings, this is where we would choose the format we want to export to. If you recall our images right now, most of yours, they should be either Camera Raw or DNG. All mine in this catalog are DNG, so I'm going to be choosing one of these formats here. If we're going to resize the image, we would take care of that here. Output sharpening, if you've done your sharpening correctly in the develop module, you don't really need to do it here, but I can explain later. There's some reasons why you might apply it here during your export. Next is metadata. Do we want to include just copyright and contact info? Do we want all of the metadata? That's really up to you. Watermarking, are you going to include a watermark with it? And then post-processing. What do we want to do after we've finished exporting the files? So let's just go through this. To start off with, I want to export this to a specific folder. I've set one up already. I think it's a good idea to be just as organized with your exports as you are with your imports. So let's choose, I set up a folder here. I created one called Export Demo, and within that I included one here, assignment specs. Basically, these are just exports that are going to be to the same specifications as what I'm asking you guys to export to in your assignment. Let's choose that. You can see I've actually already exported some images here. If there are any existing files, we need to tell it what should it do with that. I always have this set to ask what to do. When I'm exporting something and I run into a pre-existing file with the same name, I want to be alerted to that, and I want to have the opportunity to decide for myself what should happen, rather than, if we click here, overwrite without warning. That's dangerous. You could choose this if you enjoy flirting with disaster, but I don't. So I leave it here at ask what to do. Then I can look and I can decide whether or not this is something that maybe I should overwrite. Maybe I've re-edited and made some changes to my retouching, and I say, yeah, I don't really want that old version. Let's overwrite it. Maybe I want to keep both, and so I tell it to give it a new name, and I can keep them. Or maybe I say no, skip it. I don't want to export because I've already done it, but I'd like to be able to make the choice of which of these to do when the issue arises. So I leave it at ask what to do. Next, rename. This would be perhaps you are exporting several different versions. You might have two different sizes that will be printed. You might be exporting some that are black and white, and you might be exporting some that are smaller size JPEGs that are going to be used for social media. I like to export, if I'm doing something like that, I like to include that information about what their intended purpose is in the actual file name, so that when I look at it later I can distinguish between this copy and the other copy and the other. So let's say I'm actually not going to rename these because I'm okay with just the file name that I have. So I can uncheck that. Format. For your next assignment, you're going to export to JPEG. PSD would be if I wanted to have a Photoshop file to work with more over there. Some photo labs will only print TIFFs, others specify just JPEG. You'd want to have figured that out before you export these, so you know what format you need. But your average place like Costco or any consumer photo lab are just going to want JPEGs. For your assignment, I'm asking for JPEGs. Adobe RGB is the best color space as far as the most colors that can still be rendered by most printers, most professional quality printers, and some displays. ProPhoto is really way overkill. It's bigger than you need. sRGB is going to throw away a lot of color information. So let's just stick with Adobe. I want 100% quality. If I need a smaller file, I can either do it by this, limiting the file size, or I can do it by just resizing. The size of the image, the pixel dimensions, etc., are going to have an impact on how big the file is. If I wanted a full-size JPEG, then I just uncheck resize. But for your next assignment, you will be resizing it. So I asked for 220 pixels per inch because that's the resolution of my display, and I asked for 2,000 pixels on the long edge. If you look at some of these images here in my catalog, they're rectangular. 2,000 pixels on the long edge is going to be this dimension here. Lightroom is going to figure out what this dimension is going to be, but I'm not really worried about that. I just know that I don't want it any bigger than 2,000 pixels here. This I don't really care about. Lightroom is going to keep the same proportions of this frame, so I don't have to worry about that. It getting stretched out or distorted. Next, output sharpening. These already have what I feel is good sharpening in them, and they're going to look fine on the screen, so I don't need to add any here. But let's say I was exporting these for a client who wanted to print them, and they wanted to try printing them on matte paper, then I would perhaps want to add a little bit more sharpening. Matte paper tends to lose a little bit of resolution because of the texture in the paper. They just have a softer look, the way they absorb the ink. So you typically need to sharpen differently when you're dealing with some sort of matte or textured fine art paper versus glossy paper that doesn't need as much. So these are reasons you might use that, but in this case I don't need it, so I'm not going to add that there. Metadata. You know, if this is for my client, they don't necessarily need to know everything about the camera settings and all of that sort of thing, but they do need to know that I have the copyright and how to contact me in case this image kind of gets out into the world and it's not in my possession, or my clients, maybe someone else gets a hold of it, or they just see it somewhere. It finds its way onto the web and someone sees it. I want them to be able to find me in case they want to inquire about how to use the photo and get rights to it, or if they want me to do some work for them. So let's leave that there. Watermark, if you use one, you can have Lightroom generate one if you'd like. I am not going to include a watermark here. And then post-processing. After we finish exporting these, what do we want Lightroom to do? Do we want it to show the images in the Finder, open them in Photoshop or some other application? For myself, I always leave it here because after I've finished exporting, I'd like to go back to retouching other photos. So if I need to go find them in the Finder, I'll do that. But so you can do that here. You don't have to. It's optional. So I've set up where I'm going to put this. I'm going to keep the file names as is. These are my file settings and sizing. So I'm ready to export. So let's click export. You'll see the progress bar here. I can continue doing other things while this is exporting. It's one of the nice things, if you have a big batch of images, it might take a little while to export them. But as you can see, it was pretty quick. They're done already. So let's go navigate to the folder that I exported these to. I set up the file structure earlier, but I placed them in my Documents folder, in my Photo 180 folder, and within that I had a folder for our export module demo. And this is our export of images that I set up to be exported according to the assignment specifications that you all will be exporting yours to. So let's click in here, and these are the 3 images that I just exported. Let's go ahead and look at them. Select them, move down here to Get Info, and you can see the image, you can see the file name, you can see the dimensions. This one's 2000 by 1000 pixels, this one's 2000 by 735, this is 2000 by 1322. This is because I specified the long dimension, and because they all have a slightly different crop on them, this vertical dimension is what's different. We can see the size, they're not terribly large, a megabyte or 2. And that's about it. So these are a good size for social media. On my laptop here, I have a Retina display, so at 220 pixels per inch, these will all look nice and sharp. Let's preview them. Let's see, preview. Oops. So now I can arrow through these, and I've got exported JPEG copies. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me, or you can post your question in the tech support forum online. If not, if you don't have any questions, then I will see you in the next video. Thanks.